London's summer had painted the mall in brilliant, unfeeling sunshine. The changing of the guard was a familiar theater of precision, a daily ballet of scarlet and bearskin that most tourists witnessed through their phone screens. But, on this particular morning, within the sea of eager faces pressed against the barricades, one small observer was not merely watching the spectacle. He was studying it, with the solemn intensity of a general reviewing his troops, all while holding on to his father's hand with a grip made frail by a battle no 8-year-old should ever have to fight. Leo, in his faded superhero cap, was not just a spectator. He was a pilgrim in search of a moment of unwavering strength. And, at his post, a man of stone, Guardsman Thomas Rigby, was about to discover that the greatest test of his discipline would not be a stern command from an officer, but the hopeful, weary gaze of a child who believed a soldier's stoicism might be strong enough to share. The roar of London was a distant hum at the edge of the ceremonial precinct, a world away from the absolute silence that reigned within the rigid frame of Guardsman Thomas Rigby. His world, for the next 2 hours, was measured in breaths held, in the minute shift of weight from one immaculate boot to the other, in the unwavering focus on a point somewhere in the middle distance. The bearskin, heavy and ancient, sat upon his head not as a hat but as a crown of responsibility, its shadow falling across eyes that revealed nothing. He was a statue in scarlet, a part of the palace itself. To the crowd behind the black iron barricades, he was a photo opportunity. They giggled, dared each other to try and make him smile, and marveled at his stillness. Thomas did not hear them. His mind was a practiced blank, a skill honed through grueling drills and sheer will. It was a mental fortress, and today he needed it. The letter from his sister was a burning presence in his quarters, its words speaking of scans and shadows and fears too large to comprehend. He had pushed it down, locked it away behind his duty. Here, on this sacred stretch of gravel, personal sorrow had no jurisdiction. His eyes, under the deep shadow of the bearskin, performed their slow, prescribed sweep. And that's when he saw the boy. Not just registered him, but saw him. A small figure, swimming in a bright green t-shirt that read "Brave Heart," perched on his father's shoulders. But it was the boy's face that breached Thomas's discipline. Pale, with a delicate tracing of blue veins at the temples, yet lit with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. The boy wasn't pointing or laughing. He was studying Thomas with the grave concentration of a scholar. In his small hands, he clutched a toy soldier, its red paint chipped. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second longer than protocol allowed. The boys were a clear, honest blue, ringed with the fatigue of long illness but burning with a quiet light. He gave a tiny, tentative smile. Thomas, against every fiber of his training, felt the ghost of one tug at his own lips, immediately suppressed. He returned his gaze to its middle distance, but the image of the boy was now etched inside his mental fortress, a vivid crack in the blank walls. The crowd ebbed and flowed, but the boy remained, a constant in Thomas's peripheral vision. He saw the father, a man with his own weary eyes, gently shift the child's weight. He saw the boy's head begin to droop, then snap back up, determined not to miss a second. The summer sun beat down. Thomas watched as the boy whispered to his father, who then produced a small, plain blue cap from a backpack. It was a hospital cap, soft and worn. The father tenderly removed the boy's Brave Heart cap and replaced it with the blue one, a gesture so routine and intimate it felt like a dagger to Thomas's shielded heart. He understood. The sun was too much. The boy was protecting a head that had known too much. A strange, unfamiliar conflict began to stir within Thomas Rigby. It started as a faint tremor in his resolve, a whisper that grew louder with every minute the boy sat there, steadfast under his hospital cap. Here was a child engaged in a real battle, a war for his very life, showing more silent fortitude than any tourist mocking the guards for their stillness. Thomas felt the immense, symbolic weight of his own bearskin, the emblem of the queen, of tradition, of unyielding strength. And he saw, in the boy's fragile form, a more profound kind of courage. The decision did not come in a dramatic flash. It crystallized slowly, with the inevitability of a glacier moving. It was wrong by the manual. It was unprecedented. It could end his career. But, as the wind picked up, threatening to lift the boy's lightweight cap, Thomas saw him press a small hand to his head. The gesture, so simple, so vulnerable, shattered the last of Thomas's professional detachment. The rigid discipline that had been his armor transformed in an instant into a different kind of strength, the strength to act from the heart, regardless of consequence. The clock in his mind told him the relief guard was minutes away. His world shrank to the boy in the blue cap. With a precision that was now entirely his own, Thomas broke his statue pose. He took one sharp, deliberate step forward, then another, his boots crunching on the gravel with deafening finality. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Phones were raised higher. The boy's eyes widened, his grip tightening on his father's hair. Thomas stopped directly before the barricade, his face a mask of solemn ceremony. He looked not at the crowd, but solely at Leo. In one fluid, practiced motion, he unbuckled his chin strap. He lifted the towering, black bearskin from his head. For a moment, he held it, this sacred object, this piece of history, and then, with infinite care, he extended it across the barricade. He did not place it on the boy's head. He offered it, a silent question in his eyes. The crowd fell into a stunned, breathless silence, broken only by the distant cry of a gull. Leo, his own breath hitching, looked from the majestic hat to the soldier's stern, kind face, and gave a tiny, awe-filled nod. The world seemed to stop, its sound sucked into a vacuum. In that suspended silence, Leo's small hand, pale against the rich black fur of the bearskin, reached out. His fingers, delicate as bird bones, brushed the coarse hair. His father, Sam, stood frozen beneath him, a choked sound catching in his throat. He had brought Leo here for a moment of normalcy, a break from the sterile white walls and beeping machines of the hospital. He had never dreamed of this. With a gravity that belied his 8 years, Leo took the immense weight of the hat. Thomas Rigby kept his hand steady, supporting it, his eyes locked with the boy's. Then, with a tenderness that made Sam's vision blur, Thomas guided the bearskin onto Leo's head. It sank down, engulfing him, the front rim resting just above his eyebrows, the vastness of it comical and profoundly beautiful. A new kind of quiet fell, deeper than before. It was the quiet of collective breath being held, of hundreds of hearts constricting at once. Then, from the back of the crowd, a single, muffled sob broke the spell. It was like a dam bursting. A wave of emotion swept through the onlookers. Tears, unchecked, began to stream down faces. Tourists from every corner of the globe, hardened Londoners, children clinging to their parents' legs. They weren't just crying, they were witnessing. They had come for pomp and pageantry and were instead given a raw, unscripted moment of breathtaking humanity. Phones recorded, but now without the earlier frivolity. They were documenting a sacred transaction. Through the small window of his own emotion, Thomas's training reasserted itself, but in a new way. He remained at attention, his face once again a composed mask, but his eyes, those windows the boy had first peered into, held a softness that radiated warmth. He gave Leo the smallest, most official of nods, a signal between soldiers. Leo, from under the enormous bearskin, his face a picture of stunned, serious joy, attempted to mimic the nod. The gesture was so earnest, so perfectly clumsy, that a fresh, warm wave of weeping and soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Sam, feeling his son's slight weight shift with the effort, reached up to steady him. He looked at Thomas, his own eyes swimming. No words passed between the two men. None were needed. In that look was a universe of understanding, a father's bottomless gratitude, a soldier's silent salute to a greater warrior. Thomas then took one precise step back, resuming his post. He was now hatless, a breach of protocol so glaring it was electrifying. Yet, standing there, his head bare in the sun, he looked more formidable, more dignified than ever. He was no longer just a guardsman. He was a man who had chosen kindness over rules. The moment stretched, thick with feeling. Then, the clockwork of the palace ground continued. The relief guard approached, their steps measured and loud in the quiet. The corporal of the guard, a stern-faced man with a chest full of medals, marched up. His eyes took in the extraordinary scene. His guardsman, hatless, a small boy dwarfed by a bearskin, a crowd utterly transfixed. For a terrible second, Sam feared repercussion. He saw the officer's jaw tighten. But then, the officer's gaze traveled from Thomas's rigid, respectful posture to Leo's radiant, fragile face. The officer's own stern expression underwent a subtle, profound change. He gave Thomas a curt, unreadable nod, then turned his attention to the seamless execution of the change, as if a hatless guardsman was the most normal thing in the world. The ceremony proceeded. Thomas was relieved. As he marched away with his detachment, he did not look back. He didn't need to. The image was forever burned into his soul. Leo, still perched high, watched his soldier go until he disappeared from view. Only then did he sag a little against his father's head. "Dad," he whispered, his voice muffled by the fur. "I have to give it back." Sam, his heart too full to speak, nodded. He helped Leo lift the monumental hat. A palace attendant, who had been watching with a handkerchief discreetly pressed to his face, stepped forward swiftly. "If I may, sir," he said softly, his voice thick. He took the bearskin with the reverence of a holy artifact. "We'll see its return to the guardsmen." He looked at Leo. "Well done, young man." The crowd, seeing the hat being returned, began to slowly disperse, but the atmosphere was changed. Strangers smiled at each other through tears, patted each other on the shoulder. The air itself felt cleaner, kinder. Sam lifted Leo down from his shoulders. The boy seemed taller, his back straighter, though he leaned into his father's side for support. The hospital cap was back on his head, but his expression was transformed. The weariness was still there, but overlaid with a glow of triumph, of validation. "He saw me, Dad," Leo said, clutching his toy soldier tightly. "The soldier really saw me." "He did, son," Sam replied, his voice rough. They all did. As they walked slowly back towards the tube station, Leo was quiet, processing the immensity of what had happened. He wasn't just a sick kid anymore. For one magnificent moment, he had been a guardsman. He had stood his post. He had been brave. And the whole world, it seemed, had saluted him. The stone corridors of Wellington Barracks, usually echoing with barked orders and the crack of boots on stone, were shrouded in a different kind of silence. Thomas Rigby stood at stiff attention in the company office, the polished toes of his boots aligned perfectly, his eyes fixed on a point above the head of his company sergeant major. The CSM, a man named Armitage whose face looked carved from Welsh slate, paced slowly behind his desk, upon which sat the returned bearskin. It looked out of place, an object of power on a field of mundane paperwork. "Rigby," Armitage's voice was low, a gravelly rumble. "You understand the gravity. The bearskin is crown property. It is not a toy. It is not a gift. Your duty is to guard it, with your life if necessary, not to hand it over to civilians." He stopped pacing and fixed Thomas with a stare that had made younger guardsmen quake. "Explain yourself." Thomas drew a slow breath. "Sir, no explanation that fits the manual, sir. Only that it was necessary." "Necessary?" Armitage's eyebrow climbed. "To abandon your post's uniform standard? To create a public spectacle?" "The boy, sir," Thomas said, his voice unwavering. He is in a fight. A real one. He was wearing a hospital cap. He was watching us stand firm. It felt. He searched for the word his training provided, but found only a truer one. "It felt like a debt of honor, sir." The CSM was silent for a long moment, his eyes boring into Thomas. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed, a sound like wind through rocks. He walked to the window, looking out at the parade square. "The phone hasn't stopped," he said, his back to Thomas. "Press. Public. The palace press office, for God's sake. The video is everywhere." He turned around, and Thomas saw not anger, but a deep, conflicted weariness. "They're not complaining, Rigby. The story, it's gone viral, as they say. They're calling it a moment of pure humanity. The public relations people are in a tizzy. They don't know whether to court-martial you or give you a medal." Thomas said nothing. He had acted without thought for consequence. He would accept whatever came. "You will resume duties tomorrow," Armitage said finally, his decision made. "There will be no formal disciplinary action this time. But, understand, Rigby, you have shaken a very old tree. The tradition you are part of does not bend easily. You are to speak to no one. Not a word. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Dismissed. As Thomas marched out, back straight, he felt the eyes of every man in the barracks on him. They were not accusing. They were curious, appraising. Later, in the Nafi, a veteran corporal slid a mug of tea towards him. "Mad thing to do, Tom," he muttered. "Proper mad. But, good man." That quiet endorsement meant more than any official reprimand or pardon. Meanwhile, in a small, cheerfully decorated room at Great Ormond Street Hospital, Leo was experiencing a different kind of aftermath. The story had found its way here, too. Nurses smiled at him a little wider. The other children on the ward looked at him with new respect. "You're the Hat Boy," one of them exclaimed. Leo's doctor, during her rounds, sat on the edge of his bed. "I saw the video, Leo. That was incredible. How are you feeling?" Leo, who was often tired after outings, seemed energized. "I feel strong," he said, with simple conviction. He told her the story, his words tumbling out about the soldier's eyes, the weight of the hat, the quiet of the crowd. His father, Sam, watched from the corner, seeing a light in his son's eyes that had been dimmed by months of treatment. It was a light no medicine could provide. That evening, Sam scrolled through the news stories on his phone, amazed. The video was on every major news site. The comments sections were flooded with stories of kindness, of people's own battles, of gratitude for the reminder of human goodness. A fund had been started in Leo's name for childhood cancer research, donations pouring in from around the world. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, but, at its core, Sam knew, was a simple, silent exchange between his frail son and a stoic soldier. It was a story that belonged to them, yet now it seemed to belong to everyone who needed a reason to believe. Back in his barracks room, Thomas finally allowed himself to read the letter from his sister. The words about uncertainty and fear were still there, but they landed differently now. He thought of Leo's face, alight with awe under the bearskin. He thought of the immense, fragile courage it took to face each day with a smile. He took out a piece of regimental stationery and began to write, not to his sister, but to Leo. The words came slowly, carefully. He wrote not as a celebrity guardsman, but as one soldier to another, acknowledging Leo's bravery, thanking him for his steadfast watch. He posted it the next morning, a private missive into the public storm, a closing of the circle only they truly understood. The world moved on, as it always does, to new headlines and fresh spectacles. But, in two very different hearts, the event of the hat had planted a seed that continued to grow. For Thomas Rigby, life returned to the rigid rhythm of drills, patrols, and ceremonial duties. He wore his bearskin again, its weight familiar, but now carrying a new, personal significance. The public attention was managed by the regiment's press office. He gave no interviews, remained the silent, professional figure expected of him. But the other guardsmen noticed a subtle change. The new recruits, who once might have found him intimidatingly stern, now saw a quiet approachability beneath the granite exterior. He led by example, but his corrections were gentler, his patience deeper. The experience had sanded down an edge, revealing a core of compassion that made him not a weaker soldier, but a more complete one. He thought of Leo often, especially during the long, silent watches. The boy's face became a touchstone, a reminder that strength was not just about enduring physical hardship or standing unmoved against the elements. It was about the fortitude of spirit, the courage to face unimaginable fear with grace. Thomas found himself donating a portion of his pay to the fund in Leo's name, a silent, ongoing tribute. He kept a copy of the letter he'd sent, a reminder of the one time he'd let the wall down, and of the profound peace that action had brought him. For Leo, the encounter became a wellspring of strength during the most difficult days. When the chemotherapy made him nauseous and weak, he would close his eyes and remember the solid crunch of the soldier's boots on the gravel, the solemn nod, the incredible weight of the bearskin settling on his head. "Stand firm, Leo," he would whisper to himself, mimicking Thomas's posture as best he could in his hospital bed. The toy soldier, his constant companion, was now promoted in his mind to a ceremonial guardsman. The fund that bore his name grew beyond anyone's expectations. Cards and letters from strangers arrived at the hospital, sharing stories of hope and offering encouragement. Leo, with Sam's help, tried to answer as many as he could. He became a small ambassador of courage, his story proving that the smallest spark of human connection could ignite a global flame of generosity. His health journey had its ups and downs, brutal scans followed by periods of relief. But, through it all, the light in his eyes, first truly lit that day on the mall, never fully dimmed. He had a secret now, an inner citadel of strength modeled on the silent soldier who had seen his battle and honored it. Months later, on a crisp autumn day, a formal-looking envelope arrived for Sam and Leo. It was an invitation from the regiment itself. They were to be special guests at the next Trooping the Color ceremony, a thank you for their part in an event that had shown the human heart behind the uniform. It was not a public relations stunt, the letter assured. It was a genuine wish to welcome them. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. Leo, in a new suit that felt strange after his soft clothes, held his father's hand tightly as they were escorted to a special seating area. The spectacle was overwhelming. The thunder of horses' hooves, the blast of marching bands, the sea of scarlet and gold. Leo searched the lines of identical guardsmen, his heart pounding. Were any of them his soldier? It was impossible to tell. Then, as the massed bands played, and the color was trooped, a formation of guardsmen marched directly past the VIP stand. As one, in a movement so crisp it was like a single machine, every soldier in the front rank turned their head, eyes right, towards the stand. And there, third from the left, was Thomas Rigby. His eyes scanned the faces and found Leo's. No smile broke his discipline, but his gaze held Leo's for 3 full, glorious seconds. In that look was recognition, respect, and a deep, abiding connection. Leo sat up impossibly straight, his own small face a mirror of solemn pride. He didn't wave. He simply met the soldier's gaze and gave that same, slight, serious nod. Sam, watching the silent exchange, felt the tears come again, but they were sweet now, tears of completion. The circle was not just closed, it was honored. The story that had begun with a solitary, rule-breaking act of compassion was ending here, within the very tradition it had momentarily defied, now welcomed back and made richer for its humanity. Life, in its relentless and beautiful way, flowed forward. Seasons changed at the palace. The scarlet tunics gave way to greatcoats, then back again. Thomas Rigby eventually completed his service with the household division. He left not with a court-martial on his record, but with a quiet commendation for exemplary conduct and, unofficially, the profound respect of his peers. He transitioned to a role training new recruits, where he found his true calling. He taught them the drill, the history, the unwavering discipline. But he also taught them, by his own steady example, that the uniform they wore was not a shell to hide within, but a platform from which to project integrity, and that true strength had room for profound kindness. The story of the boy and the bearskin became a legendary regimental tale, passed down not as an example of broken rules, but as the ultimate lesson in the spirit of the guard. Leo's battle was long and arduous. There were times when the hospital walls felt like they would close in forever, and the memory of the bearskin felt like a dream from another lifetime. But he fought, with a tenacity that amazed his doctors, and a quiet courage that humbled his father. He drew on his inner guardsmen during every procedure, every fearful night. The fund in his name funded new research, helped other families, and became a lasting part of his legacy. Years later, on a bright spring morning much like the first, a young man stood by the palace gates. He was tall and lean, with a faint, thin scar tracing his temple, a badge of honor from his childhood war. At his side stood an older man, his father Sam, whose hair was now more gray than brown. They were not there as tourists. Leo, now 17 and in remission for 5 years, had received a personal invitation. He was to meet a retired guardsman. They were escorted to a quiet office in the barracks. The room was neat, filled with the scent of polish and old wood. And then, the door opened, and Thomas Rigby walked in. He was out of uniform, dressed in a simple tweed jacket, but he still carried the same upright bearing, the same air of calm authority. His hair was shorter, flecked with gray. For a long moment, the two just looked at each other, the soldier and the boy, both now men, linked by a moment that had defined them both. "Leo," Thomas said, his voice warmer than Leo remembered from the shouts of command on the square. "Guardsman Rigby," Leo said, his voice firm, offering his hand. Thomas took it, his grip strong and sure. "Just Thomas, please." He looked at Sam, and the two fathers shook hands, a world of understanding passing between them over a decade in the making. They talked for an hour. Thomas spoke of his service, his new life. Leo, with a shy pride, spoke of his studies, his hope to become a pediatric nurse. He spoke not of being a victim, but of a survivor who wanted to offer others the same hope he'd been given. He mentioned the fund, now a thriving charity. Thomas listened, his eyes shining with a pride that needed no words. Before they left, Thomas presented Leo with a small, carefully wrapped box. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was not the bearskin, but something perhaps more meaningful, a polished brass button from a guardsman's ceremonial tunic, mounted on a simple card. Engraved beneath it were the words, "For Leo, who stood his post with the courage of a regiment. Always remembered. Tr." Leo's throat tightened. He looked from the button to Thomas. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of a lifetime. "No," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion he no longer felt the need to hide. "Thank you. You taught me more about duty in one glance than 20 years of service." They walked out together onto the parade square, now empty and quiet. The shadow of the palace stretched long in the afternoon sun. Leo paused, looking at the spot, now worn smooth by countless boots, where a guardsman had once taken 2 impossible steps towards a child. The story had traveled the world, moved millions to tears, raised millions for charity. But here, now it was just theirs. A quiet, enduring bond between 2 souls who had met in a fleeting moment of perfect understanding, one offering a symbol of unbreakable strength, the other revealing the true meaning of it. It was a story that began with a hat, but it ended, as all the best stories do, with the unshakable knowledge that the smallest acts of seeing, of truly seeing another person, can echo forever in a human heart.